Okay, good afternoon, right before lunch. So let's see, we're going to talk about open sourcing a library in Java and how hard could that be, because sometimes people are complaining it's quite difficult, including Josh. So the coming 15 minutes we'll walk through the things I did to open source a library. But first, who am I? Oftentimes people ask me, what do you do exactly? Because you don't just code, you talk, you help people. So typically the answer is I develop things and I talk about them. But I'm doing a lot more things. I'm officially full-time developer, but I'm also a part-time developer advocate. I'm talking at conferences. I'm helping a backend guild within ING to help other people speak and also share knowledge. I just started a Java user group along with some colleagues from Duo 1 month ago. We had a great talk already. Next week we'll have another session, so we're going quite well along with that. And within ING, I'm also helping people speak. So we have the global, for all of ING, not just Netherlands and Belgium, speaker community to help people propose talks for sessions like this. And also mentor others, not just in speaking, but also in technology and improving your engineering culture, because that's my main specialty. And yeah, of course, I sometimes speak at DevOps, at Foxt, and also meetups. But it's not about me, it's about open sourcing a library. And I put my between quotes because once you open source things, you start to lose ownership in a certain way. People can just copy your code and start their own copy, as long as your license allows it. That's something you have to be aware of. We'll also be covering maintenance and support over time, because, well, you build something, it might be there 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Look at JUnit, for example, or Spring. And that's something to keep in mind. But to use something, you also have to publish it. So we'll cover that, and then the takeaways. Now, open source, it does have some benefits. You can show off your skills, both in architecture, in design, and in coding, both to your colleagues, but also outside. So if you want to fill up your resume with some code and you want to share it beforehand, then open source is a perfect way. Typically, you do it as a student because you share your assignments with the teacher, but also when you start working, you can offer the code for people to download and run it by themselves, or check out how you are coding and how you're solving issues within code, because your Git commit history is also available. But one of the nicer things, I think, is the broader feedback, because typically when you work in the office, then you just have your colleagues around you, the teams around you, and they give you feedback. It's quite limited in scope. And when you open source things, you will get a much broader feedback, because everyone on the internet can actually access your code and start commenting upon it, both positive and negative, but let's keep in mind, just focus on the positive stuff. And along with that, you can get a lot more collaboration, because normally, like I mentioned, you're in your small team, your company, and if you open source things and people start finding issues, they start offering merge requests with code proposals, you have a lot more collaboration, you start learning from them. And that, I think, is the most interesting part about open source. Plus, you can inspire others and use it for examples. So the project I'm going to show, I built it in Java 21, and I could actually tell one of my colleagues who was interested in Java 21 back then, like, hey, this is the code, you can just run it on your laptop, and this is how you apply new things, and these new options are available in Java 21. He was coming from Java 11, so it was quite a big step for him. And of course, there's also downsides, and that's something to keep in mind. If you're the only maintainer on a project, well, XC is ago by now, but that only had one developer, it was commonly used, and they did try to inject malware that way. Unfortunately, it was caught in time by someone who's profiling code. So that's, yeah, something really unfortunate. Unfortunately, we just find it out. So for myself, for the motivation to do this, I do try to pick something. I don't like year goals, because then you have a certain scope. I do like to finish what I start. So if it takes me more than a year, or I go over a certain boundary, like a quarter, I will just take more time and finish it up. So I do try to find nice challenges, and that includes open sourcing a library and writing some open source code and looking for feedback there. And as it happens, it's also nice to start a talk about it. And there is quite a challenge, because I have been using open source for like maybe 25, 30 years by now, and most of you probably also did it with your phone, with the applications you're running, with your laptop. And I do feel bad about it sometimes, because those people, they build the source, and most of them aren't even fully paid for it, and you're using it. So I do sometimes feel I should give back something. And you can do that by submitting issues, you can do that by feedback, and you can, of course, also do that by writing your own code or releasing your own library. But there's one thing, and that's the past half year coming along with a lot of streamers and influencers. They are telling people to fill up with open source. It's Hacktober this month. Do show off your curriculum vitae with that, your resume. Please don't do that, because if you do that now, and half a year from now, they will see it, that you didn't follow up on it. It will also show bad for you. You should have a better motivation to actually release source code and keep it up to date. I'm not going to talk about an open source project for ING, but we do some open source at ING. One of the most common projects is Lion, that's a front-end framework. Another one is Baker, which can be used to orchestrate processes. It's written in Scala, but you can use it in Java and Kotlin as well. The other thing we do within ING, and that's it's called inner source. We do like sharing source, but not, of course, with the outside. We're a bank, so we have to be careful with what we share, what we don't share. But inner source, that's quite big within ING. So we do help other teams out. You can also look at someone else's code, make suggestions, and in that way improve the overall quality. However, my game, or my library, is built about a game. Who here knows this game? Not too many hands. I will share the name just soon afterwards. What I did is read save game files, and this game is almost 25 years old by now. But you can see on the left side, it reads a lot of statistics. And on the right side, it reads items that you can find within the game and helps you to see how far is your completion. This is mostly useful for people playing the game, but also for people who are streaming the game, which is still quite popular. So the game itself is called Diablo 2. The remake 3 years ago is Diablo 2 Resurrected, because they were going to sell Diablo 4, so they're already 2 iterations ahead. And the main goal of the game is, well, kill Diablo, get items, improve your character, and get better at what you do. So it's like a big gacha machine, but with nice game mechanics. However, reading those things also have some challenges, because it is an old game, but there is some complexity, but layers of complexity. So on top, you have to actually keep in mind that the outcomes that you will get will be changing depending on what kind of items you're wearing. So if you look at where the mouse cursor is, it shows a bonus. You also have to calculate those, and those are not stored within the save game, so actually have to calculate those within code and then display them for the users. That's a nice challenge for me, because at that point I can make some nice unit tests around it to cover edge cases and fill that up. It's also nice to improve my own skills. Another thing is most games are built in C or C++. And as you can imagine, that's a different way of saving things than compared to Java, because we don't have null terminated strings. But in C you do. And the problem is it's an old game, so they limited the length of the name that you could have to 15, which is not a big issue if you just use it for the character name, which is 1 time. But you can actually add your name to items. And if you don't end with a 0, then you're parsing a value ahead, and you're getting wrong values, and everything blows up because it's all C-style values in bits. So I had to actually make a character that's called longest possible, because that's the longest possible name. It's a nice fit. And that way I could test how this works, because one of the users complained like, hey, it crashed on me, and help me out, please. Which brings me to the challenges. It's written in Java, and it's reading a binary file. But I also had to think about which elements am I going to open source? I just built it for myself at a certain point, and I can do more, and it's getting more complex. And for me, a library, like a framework, covers complexity. So you have a facade on top. Underneath, you have all the complexity. And for the average user, they just need a facade, and it's fine for them. If they want to add more stuff, they can work on the code below or ask me to change things with a request. But that way, you share with them something that's easy for them to use. And another issue I struggled a bit with was like, okay, I have code now. I want to open source it. Which license am I going to use? So in the end, for me, it turned out to be an LGPL version, because there were some existing Java 1.6 libraries that did this, because it's an old game and a long time ago. And I did use some part of what I built. Like, for instance, the character name that you saw, they have Huffman encoding, and I copied that part. So for me, it was like, okay, I should give back to them as well by using the same license, which is LGPL 2 limited. So that was not an issue. If you share the library and use it, you can use another license on top. As long as you don't adjust the library itself, then you have to keep that license. And I had to figure out how to release it, because if I ask you, most people will say, oh yeah, Maven Central, that's easy. But there's more options nowadays, so I also had to check that out. Like, okay, what are the ups and downsides of these multiple options? And I will cover those quite soon. But one of the nice things is there's so many variables in the game, and I really had to keep that in mind. I didn't really show that earlier, but there's things like set items, and if you have like 2 or 3 items, then you get more statistics added, and those are not in the save game file. You actually have to calculate those, and those add up, and then in the end you will have the ultimate value. That becomes quite complex after a while, because there's a lot of options possible. There's items in the inventory that get bonuses, but other items that don't. So how are you going to filter those out? And Java reads the bytes in big endian, and well, most of you probably don't know that, but that's the order of the bits. And if you mix those up, you'll get interesting results if your entire data structure is based upon those bit values. So figuring that out, especially when there's a patch and things change and break. Internally, of course, they will make a new save game file with a new format, but I'm reading that new file, and with me, everything is exploding. One of the issues, it's readable? Yeah, okay, cool. One of the issues I had was that actually, at a certain point, they either used a new compiler for C, or they improved some things. And then the bits were actually moving along, because if you ended at the right byte, then the next value would end up at that point. I would move on to the next byte within the values that you have. But if you ended up at bit 7, typically it would go to the next one, and certainly after a patch, it moved 8 bits along. So it was an easy fix once I found out, but debugging that and figuring out, like, why the hell my value is exploding at this point, that was quite interesting. The same way with the 2 and 3 bytes, those were skipped earlier, so in the old versions, and suddenly they patched something and it improved, and I had to write tests about it as well. And as mentioned in the top bullet point, what really helped me out was that they have mod-friendly support. So I could open the save game files after a patch, get the text files out, which are basically CSV files, which have a lot of value, because if I see value 157, I'm not wondering like, oh, this means that value and will have this impact on my calculations. But if you have the text value attached to it, that also other people who play the game understand, such things become a lot easier. And I don't, at that point, have to reverse engineer everything, but I can just use those text files, extract them within a minute, and follow up by improving things. I did talk to one of the original developers, asked him, like, did you do this from the start? Because it's so nice for me and also for people who want to mod the game. And they did have a little bit, because it sped up development, but they improved it over time when the original game was built. So if you're going to publish, you may wonder, should I do this anonymous or not? Because sometimes within the game industry, and also with people who play games online, they get a bit overly emotional. You can have some legal issues as well, as we saw with Nintendo past week. And within this game, I also had one person in America who claimed to come over to the Netherlands and visit me and another Dutchman to say hello. So at that point, I was like, it's interesting to actually use my nickname, but the nickname I'm using is also the one that people know me by. So if you say, oh yeah, that's Kobe Johan, they will be like, yeah, who's this guy? And my nickname they know, so they know, easy to find. They can just search for the nickname and figure out where to find the code. So as you can also see in the bottom of my GitHub description, it's a secondary account. I built parser code, but I also built examples, because I did want people to build on top of it. If you build a library and you don't document it well, it's yeah, are people going to use it actually? So the examples help people out to look at possibilities they have, and they can use their own imagination to build more possibilities on top of it. However, if you want to stay anonymous, and you can be, don't release your 1.0.0 version at Christmas Eve just before dinner at 5 o'clock, because it failed a couple of times. I threw the Git files away. And at that point, it picked up my global name, which, well, in this case, yes, it's my name, but that's not the worst, right? And oh, it also lists my server name. So now you know I have a Mac Mini, and it also shows that I'm on KPN as a provider. So that's not perfectly wonderful. So if you do try to be anonymous, be careful with this, especially if you build stuff that might get you into legal trouble, like Nintendo and emulating software, because, yeah, it takes away the fun. However, another challenge that you have is, how are you going to share this for a longer time? Because if I'm getting fed up with the game, and well, after 24 years, you might wonder if that's the case, but still, it could happen. I could get a new stop with Java, move to Kotlin or something like that. And not planning to, but at least you should do more than, okay, here's the code, good luck with it. Because at that point, most people, it's not seamless, they will just walk away and move to some other library to do this, or translate it in some other way. It also helped me to step up and actually write proper technical documentation, which is a good skill for an engineer. With a library, you have to do this. So I also wrote a lot more Java doc than I was used to. Again, you're sharing a library and you're sharing the Java doc because you're publishing it. So they actually get the Java doc feedback also within IntelliJ or any other IDE that you're using. And I added, as shown, the code, example code, and an implementation, so people could actually see and run on their PC, okay, I use this library, what's going to happen, how easy is it? And that step up was quite practical. For the more technical decisions that I made, and I will show a couple of those to you the next minutes, I used a mother, which is Markdown, any decision is a record. It's typically for architectural decisions, but it's also very nice to document with your code the decisions that you've made over time. Because I built this like almost a year ago now, and some of the reasoning to pick a certain decision, I might have forgotten by now. I have to look back. You know, it's from the office as well. You have to check emails like, okay, I talked to that person like a year ago. What was the outcome again? Why were we choosing this or not choosing that? So it does help out a bit. Let me see if I can actually check it around a bit. So in the docs decisions, I shared the decision to use Markdown as a record. But for example, I also choose to not use Lombok, and why not use it? So originally I built it with Lombok, because I was used to that, and then I was like, I want to minimize my external, it's a library, so whenever I add Lombok, other people who use my library also have to use Lombok. That's not very nice, so let's take that one out. In the end, it wasn't too much work, actually. I am using Java 21, so I can use records. The only main challenge I had was writing the builder, because, yeah, again, at builder, easy. And some of the records I use, they have like 40 fields, especially the items, because they look simple, but they are complex under the hood. I also decided to move to a more modern Java version. It's not really listed here, but you do impact with a library if you set your level like to 21. There's a reason that Maven and Spring are still stuck on 17, for example. And stuck, that's not negative, but they have a reason, because you don't want to be the party that pushes people like, hey, you have to upgrade to the latest Java now. So I'm trying to follow the LTS system, so I will go to 25 next year. But that way, the people using the library will have less impact. Instead of using every 6 months, you should now go to 23, and well, good luck. Unless there's something really nice being added, I don't intend to pick one of the in-between versions. So it's the minor reading might be interesting for me, but I will just wait for 25 at that point. And this is, as you can see on the screen as well. Oh, you're not seeing my screen. Damn. You should have told me. Let me see if I can actually change that. Display. There you go, extended display mirror. That's better, right? Yeah. So the way this is written down, it's simple, it's concise, and you can just add new fields. You have the options that you consider, so you can look back at why, what you considered, and why you decided to make this decision. So why is it good? Why is it bad? Lombok included, so you can link in it to external sites. I think the module system I linked to an actual video of Devox. It really helps out if you document. And because I did this for my open source project, I actually also used it within ING to share with other people, like, hey, this is useful. We should also do this for our project. It helps out. It's not just for me to know what I did a year from now, but it's also very nice if someone new comes into the project and needs to learn why we made certain decisions, which might be different to what they're used to. Let me see if I can actually go back. Yes, nice. So do check those out. I don't think there's a marked any decision in the records talk, this Devox, unfortunately. But do check those out. I do think there's some from last year of a Devox UK, I'm quite certain. And as you can see here, it's concise and easy to use. But like I mentioned, I was really focusing on not sharing too much dependencies to the outside world, because you are enforcing at that point upon your users that they should be using that version. And some of you might know this, that's the versions plugin, and it allows you to either display updates or actually also change them for you. I do prefer the display one, because sometimes I'm using SLF4j as well. It will pop you up to an alpha or beta version, and that's not what I want. I do want to have stable versions coming out. So you display version at that point, including for plugins. There's another command for that. I use those to actually update the library in an easy way. So for larger scale migrations, I have been using Open Rewrite. And in case you're wondering, I've heard that before, it is quite useful for actually migrating Java 17 to 21. I had to correct the package name because I had to include the license once I decided what the license was. And I had to actually remove some of the unused imports. And that part is quite nice if you have people doing merge requests to you, that you can just tell them, okay, please run Open Rewrite on top of this. And that way, the merge request itself will be cleaned up, making it easier for you to review and follow up on that. And you can also do that with your own project within the company. The last one, yeah, I didn't build it with AssertJ originally, and then I saw Victor's talk a year ago, and I was like, yeah, I should. So I also migrated all my existing assert equals to AssertJ. It is much more readable. So if you're considering doing that, that's one of the main benefits of using Open Rewrite. If you contain the change, it's really easy to actually upgrade. And if you have questions about it, I think Tim is in the venue as well, so do ask him about it. He can tell you everything you need to know. The community building is another interesting part, because I had two different users. I had users in mind, like developers, like all of you, but I also had users who were streaming with my library to display stuff on screen. And they have a different approach to that. So developers, they were coming to me like, hey, can you also do something that can write those files? Because then we can hack them around and do cool stuff with it. Well, I made the decision to actually do it read-only, because it's easier to develop, and I could use records at that point. But the actual users of the library who run the application, they're much more interested in how does it look. Because typically streamers, and in some cases it's gamers themselves who just want, for example, a JavaFX application. The streamers, I built an application for them that is actually templating HTML output. So I have a REST endpoint, they run software like OBS, Open Broadcasting System, and they can load in HTML on top of what they're playing as a game, along with the webcam and everything coming along. It will help them out because those save games, they update every 5 minutes. So you can see every 5 minutes the new statistic on screen. If they are doing a speed run and they're in a rush, you have people like, hey, what's your current statistics? Are you doing well? Are you not doing well? And they have to open up everything. They're out of focus. Well, if you have it on stream, you can actually just point them at like, hey, you can see it there, and you can continue playing at that point. So to give you an example, the original ones that you saw was my own HTML creation without CSS, just simple markup. So I had one of the streamers asked him like, hey, can I use your stuff? Because he cut out a lot of stuff because he was not interested in it. He just made his own HTML, added some nice emojis on top. And then a Polish guy, Fivers, came along. It's like, they had a bit of an argument for 1 hour, like, yeah, I have better smileys than you. So they had a discussion also about the poison. Should it be a green mushroom or should it be broccoli? Then in the end, it turned out to be broccoli. So, and as you can see here as well, there's a lot more information with the other streamers, so they can actually tailor it to their own needs. That's their main goal at that point. So compared to a developer, the real backend user is completely different, and it was something I didn't really expect. But you're done building at that point. So you've published your code in GitHub or whatever Git service you use. How do you share it? And, well, you could just tell people to use Maven clean install, but then others will be angry. So let's not do that. There's many options available as well on top of that. And originally, like I mentioned, you would go to Maven Central, but Maven Central is complex. So what other options do we have? And before actually Googling, my first thought was like, yeah, I haven't been studying for a while, so let's ask those students what they're using nowadays. And nearly all of them came up with Jetpack, because it's easy to upload. You don't really need an account, I think, and it's free for open source. However, you have to add another repo in your Maven settings. That's something to keep in mind. So you're opening up downloads from an extra repository. And I work at a bank, and they're not really quite clear on how they protect you from, for example, someone injecting an IO Spring or a Log4j, which might have malware. And if they get that because you asked them to add that extra repository to their Maven settings, I wouldn't feel right with that. So for me, this sounded nice for a proof of concept. If I want to share something, then sure, go use Jetpack. It looks great. But then there was another option that I checked out, and that was GitHub Packages, because they're also free for open source, and I don't want to spend money on it because it's like a hobby project, and well, let's see how that works out. My code is already on GitHub. Should be easy, right? It is for the developer. But for the user of your library, they don't just have to add the extra repository to their settings, but they also have to update their token every month. Well, with a library, how often are you going to work on it? That might also be quite annoying. I think that's not very seamless. I prefer seamless migrations for people to actually get their stuff along. I've also, for almost a year now, trying to find out, like, what are they doing with security? They do have the PandaBot, they do have a lot of other checks in it, but if I'm actually publishing code to them, are they doing extra checks, like Maven Central is doing? And I'm still not clear about it, so I even asked last Sunday to some of the Microsoft employees, like, hey, who can I ask? But so far, no answer yet. It's not documented anywhere, unfortunately. And that would help out. If they're secure, I'm sure. Might be a good option, despite having to add those things to your settings. So I decided to go for the safe one, and I had a lot of colleagues tell me, like, yeah, you're crazy, because it's a lot of work. Everyone's complaining about it. Are you sure? But it's free for open source. It's easy to. Everyone has it on their laptop anyway. No matter if you use Gradle or Maven, it's there. And then there's this guy on the internet who was also complaining about it last month. Like, it's complex. So I had a short discussion with him. Like, yeah, there are easier alternatives. I think you should make it too easy with Maven Central, because there are some reasons why it is complex, and that's mainly within security challenges. So you have to have a domain, they will check you, you have to have a complete zip followed up, and I will explain all the parts in the next session. However, like Josh, most of those complaints about the complexity are about the old portal. So if you see OSSRH somewhere, that's old stuff. And I was lucky enough to be publishing around November, December, when they were still in beta, and I could actually check it out and start running it and see how it worked out for me. In March, and apparently 7th, according to my screen, they disabled the old entry. So if you see people like, hey, create a new account, that's no longer possible. You have to use a new one. I'm not sure how the migrations work, and that's what I actually also told Josh, like, go ask the Sonatype people so they can help you out migrating towards the new portal, because it's so much easier. However, many guides, and that was also why I failed with my first 1.0.0 release, are based on those old portals and all the old instructions. So ignore everything before March this year. They are updating the documents over time, but yeah, as you can guess, ChatGPT as well, that's still based on old information. Ignore it, just look it up by yourself. So it's now called Sonatype Central, but it's actually still Maven Central. And it's still the same repo that you've been querying for the past years. There's no difference there. Only the interface, the web interface changed. And now you can actually log in with your own account, as you did before, but you have to create it on Jira. That's still old-fashioned. That's also what Josh was complaining about. You can use your Google account, or like I did. My code was on GitHub. I used my GitHub account. And at that point, because you have to declare your domain, they have to know that the domain is owned by you. So typically you have to upload things to the domain that you're claiming to be. So if I would use NLJ Hutting, I would have to own the domain actually and upload a file there. If I'm using my GitHub, I only need to log in with GitHub and it's done for me. So all the other requirements are basically the same. They're still secure, they're still scanning for you, they're still keeping everything secure for you. But the plugins they are updating at this point. I think 0.60 is the current plugin, so 1.0 should be out sometime soon, but for me it worked fine. Now, to upload there, as mentioned, it's a bit complex. You need to own the domain. So if you have your own website, for example, I would use ING as well, I would have to upload something on the ING website to prove that I own ING. Of course, as we do open source, we did that in the past. But it's tedious if you have a lot of domains. And if you just have your code on GitHub already and you don't really care about moving it to some other space, then you can just use GitHub to log in. All the other checks that they're doing is on the jar file itself. And officially, people are also, yeah, you have to do Javadoc. Oh, God. But I think also with 1% coverage, you're still enough. You just need a Javadoc file. Of course, you also need to update the sources, because everything you upload to Maven Central, it's solid. And that's something I didn't mention with Jetpack before, but with Jetpack, you can actually change files for 30 days. So imagine uploading a 1.0.0 and then changing it. What if you break your interface? Whoopsie. That's something to keep in mind. So Maven does seem complex, Maven Central, but there's reasons for that. You do need to include MD5 and SHA-1, and I think also they have two other options, SHA-256 and 512, but those are optional, so you could add them if you want to. If you use the plugin, they're added for you anyway, so they're there for future-proof. But the main challenge I foresaw was doing the signing, because the files that you're uploading are signed, actually. So there's a double check on, are you who you are? Do you not have a man in the middle? And you need the PGP, and it's called GPG on the website, but the guide itself, it's perfect. You just walk through it for 10 minutes. It's like 4 pages, and then everything is set. It's explaining what's happening, what you're doing, and if it fails, how to solve it. So my worries at that point were done. So, okay, this does look pretty achievable, actually. But at that point, you also have to decide on your license and developer information. So I did open a spare Gmail address, which I can use. So if there's spam on that email address, I can actually receive it there, and it's fine because your mail address is stored in the POM. So if they are scanning the POM for your mail address, they can start spamming you. If you want to be anonymous, same way, you can just do an anonymous email address and it's resolved. The license for me was, well, okay, I decide on the license, and at that point, open rewrite to fix the files, commit, done. And if you are uploading a manual zip, you have to be aware that they have a new structure, and that structure is including the package path. So that's changed from the old setup. So if you used the OSRH before, then you do have to do some extra steps within the migration. So people like Josh have to adapt their workflow. And like I mentioned, it's once it's published, it stays published. You can't modify it anymore. So the only way to modify it is release a new version with your changes, which I think is a good thing. It's not good for them because they have the file storage. If you have a big jar file, then, well, that's a lot of space taken up, but it is what it is. So the process for me is, I thought like, let's just run the plugin. It should be easy, and Maven release perform, and then some bad things happened. This is the 1.3.0 version. I used the 0.50 of 0.40 version of the plugin. It was still being developed at that point, and I got a Service 500. So, okay, let's turn on debug and let's see what's going on so I can actually fix it. And it only told me there's an internal server error. It's like, yeah, wonderful. So I did resolve it by doing it manually, but in the latest plugins, it's also resolved. So apparently they had a bug that I triggered with my code, and well, it's been worked around by now. So if you use the latest versions again, they're still developing stuff over time. It's new. You should be okay. But I kept it in my presentation because it's easy to actually show how it works manually. So the alternative is just using the web portal, which is quite new. It's available at the URL here, but well, if you just search for it, you will also find it, and it looks like this. So as you can see, it's no longer old website boxes, but quite modern layout. You upload your jar file or zip file with the jar, with all the required files like the Java doc. And at that point, you start publishing it. But the publish itself, it starts with validating things. And that takes about, well, depending on how big your code base is, 5 to 10 seconds. So they check your hash codes. They check the code itself for vulnerabilities. They check your dependencies for vulnerabilities. So I think you will be declined if you actually use the old Log4j, which has the main vulnerability a couple of years ago. And then you still have to push publish. The plugin itself actually offers you to do this all automatically, so it will just take a while. And for me, it was like 1.5 to 2 minutes to fully publish a new version with Maven release prepare, Maven release perform. And well, just grab a cup of coffee. It's not taking too long. You can actually, before you finish your coffee, it's already done. So don't worry too much about it. Let me see if I can actually go back again to see how that looks. No. Would you work at once? Yeah, we got the browser again. Nice. So I'm actually easy to find because, well, my package, someone else actually has the name D2R already claimed. So it's interesting. So you can see it's, well, my last version was published 17 days ago, like almost 2 weeks ago. I do still update it. There's still patches coming out for the game. What I don't like too much about the Maven Central is the details. They do list a lot of stuff. But what they don't list for you, and that's what Maven repository does do, is which dependencies are provided. So like I mentioned, I did really want to bring the dependencies down to a minimum so that the usage will be seamless for the developers. You just get the library, you do your own stuff, and you're done. The only thing I included was SLF4j, and I'm still looking at getting rid of that by using the Java util logging library internal within the JDK. So then I'm fully done with any external dependencies. It's just, there's the library, good luck with it, have fun. All the other stuff is just no vulnerabilities, it's all up to date. I can keep it up to date also with the versions plugin and release new versions once I'm adding some new functionality, or I do have a vulnerability, of course. And I was quite happy that it was actually working at a certain point. Something to mention is that there's a tool called JReleaser written by Andres Almirai. It also should make this easy, because when I run into the original plugin issues, the feedback I got from some of the other people was just JReleaser. It's much easier. It fixes all your issues. It does all the stuff for you, like the GPG stuff, the setting it up. It is the release on steroids. So I'm using the release plugin. I can just run it locally, but I'm not doing things like release notes. I'm not going to go to Twitter, like tell everyone, hey, you should use this. If you have a big library, of course you should do that. In my case, I have like 10, 15 heavy users, and I would just tell them on Discord and they will know about it anyway. So that might change depending on your product and what you're doing with it. So if you're not sure about Maven Central, and they can also publish to Jetpack, etc., then you can use JReleaser as well. There's some quite good talks about it. So the takeaways for me is like everyone's telling me, oh man, this is crazy. Why you do Maven Central? It's too much work. Don't do this. It's insane. Know what you're getting into. But actually building the library, starting to filter out, documenting it properly, making the interface itself as small as possible, removing dependencies, that was actually a lot more work than figuring out how to upload it to Maven Central. And one of those issues that I had, and I do hope it's a lot better now, is that a lot of documentation was still outdated. I had documents coming from like 9-10 years ago telling me to do something, and then it turned out it didn't work. So it's like, oh, okay, let's try something else. And you're constantly trying to search for something that might help you actually release the software. The PGP is, I understand why it's there. Especially if you have something like Spring, you don't want to have someone overriding your IO Spring library, because there will be just too much impact on you. And some tooling still needs to update. And for the support in the community, for me, it's like there's a small group of people. I think there's still 20,000 people worldwide, maybe a little bit more playing the game, so I don't have a really large audience. The streamers themselves, that's like maybe 100 people, and that's it. But it's still nice to actually make things easy for them to use. And also at that point promoting Java. The application that I'm using is just a normal Quarkus application. I build it with GraalVM. So I can share the executable, which is a 28 megabyte zip file. Just unzip it, it will run your you don't need to install Java, it's fine, it's fast. It starts up like in a couple of milliseconds. It uses about 50 megabytes of memory, up until about 100. There's alternative solutions with JavaScript that take up to 400 megabytes, many hundreds of megabytes of download as well. And people have to install it and hope it works. And those are also based on the outdated save games that I fixed and that I showed in an earlier thing. Because I have unit tests around it, I can actually quickly fix those. I just send me the save file, I will load it up, I can easily debug it now, and follow up on that by fixing that. Almost at the end. Any questions? I do have stroopwafels, by the way, so if you have a good question, you can actually...
Well, I was wondering, is it not possible also that if you do open source something and it's a bit successful, that it creates maybe a bit of stress, like you feel the obligation to maintain it? How do you see that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. So I'll repeat it for the people in the recording. If you open source a library, it becomes popular at that point. And well, popular, I don't think it really matters if you have a lot of users. It matters who your users are. But it could create stress, definitely. But it depends on yourself, on what you're obligating yourself to do. Look at Maven, for example. Maven has like 10, 15 people maintaining it. Think about how many people are actually using Maven. And all those people have demands, because if something breaks in Maven, sure as hell they will start calling you. So at that point, there's a bit of an imbalance, like those people are doing it voluntarily. You don't get paid for it, you just get your moral support, like, oh, wow, wonderful, thank you for doing it. But that's it. And you should actually, if you build something, of course, this library won't cost that, but if you build something that's impacting a lot of people like Maven, then you should maybe at a certain point, like Spring also became a commercial product. If you want support, pay us for it and we'll gladly do it for you. And that's perfectly normal and perfectly acceptable as well. You can't expect people to like, hey, you have to run now because my server's on fire on the other side of the world in the middle of the night for you. That's not going to work. So once you get more popular and get more used, I think you should actually start thinking about those things as well. You can get a stroopwafel afterwards. Any other questions? Then I will share a sheet with a lot of links. If you have any questions that you want to ask after, you can just find me by the shirt. I do have a recognizable shirt. Also on the blue stuff, so Twitter, Blue Sky, whatever, just reach out and I can also help you out. The links are there. My sheets should be up, I think, in a couple of days on GitHub as well. And let me check, because I did want to share something else before I end the talk. Let me switch the screen again. Because later today, and like I mentioned, I'm really promoting people to start speaking. Later today, there's a BOF near the stairs down here with Bert-Jan Schrijver. He's trying to help people out who might be interested in starting to speak, starting to share. And if you don't like speaking, do something like start writing. Do share your knowledge, because everyone has something to share, something interesting to talk about. If you have time and you're here, go visit that session. It should be quite inspiring for you, and hopefully also make you decide to also start talking at a conference like this. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the conference.